Miners McMillan and Hubbard took part in the busy season at a camp near Deadwood in the winters of 1887 and 1888, a period marked by the Black Hills Gold Rush, a phenomenon that drove migration and radically changed the western United States. Members of the Navajo people appear near Old Fort Defiance in New Mexico, a place that showed strong tension between indigenous people and American forces throughout the 19th century, marking the process of colonization and forced displacement of native communities. The indigenous chief known as Spotted Tail, featured in the record around 1869, represents the struggle of native peoples in North America against United States expansion over traditional lands during the 19th century, a period marked by intense conflict and attempts at peace negotiation. The Old Mission Church in Zuni Pueblo, New Mexico, recorded in 1873, symbolizes the impact of Catholic missions established during Spanish colonization in the southwestern United States, a time when indigenous peoples were experiencing deep social and cultural change. The record of the so-called 8 Dakota ceremonial dancers between 1880 and 1910 was made at a time of intense change for indigenous peoples in the United States, marking cultural resistance in the face of forced assimilation and displacement policies. Little Poker, identified as an Apache member in a record made between 1890 and 1909, symbolizes the changes experienced by indigenous peoples during the colonization of the western United States, a period marked by territorial disputes and forced displacement of these communities. Judge R.N. Stevens played a central role by reading the Declaration of Independence to the crowd in Nome, Alaska, during the July 4, 1901 celebrations, reinforcing the territory's connection to national ideals during a period of United States expansion and consolidation. Uniformed women on horseback beside a man at Fort Verde, Arizona, between 1884 and 1887, show the presence of women at military posts during the westward expansion of the United States, a setting shaped by conflict and social change on the American frontier. The Sioux Indigenous Camp, recorded around 1882, shows the traditional way of life of this Great Plains people at the height of westward expansion policies in the United States, a period marked by conflict, forced displacement, and intense cultural change. The Hayden Survey Expedition, recorded by William Henry Jackson around 1870, was essential to the exploration and documentation of the American West, providing photographs and scientific reports that directly helped lead to the creation of Yellowstone National Park. Pueblo hunters, recorded around 1890, symbolize indigenous resistance and adaptation to expanding settlement in the United States in that century, a period marked by pressure on native cultures and the occupation of ancestral lands in the American Southwest. Members of the Cheyenne Tribal Police, organized by United States authorities around 1880, played a key role in the government strategy to supervise and integrate native peoples, deeply affecting traditions and the autonomy of indigenous communities at the time. A Cheyenne woman close to 100 years old posed in 1888, a period marked by repression of indigenous nations in the United States after the Indian Wars, whose legacy included forced removal and the loss of ancestral lands. Her survival symbolizes cultural resilience. Ute people gathered by a tent made of moose hide symbolize indigenous life before the intensification of United States removal and territorial restriction policies between 1871 and 1874, a process that had lasting impacts on native cultures. Known for surviving the events involving the 7th Cavalry Regiment, the Horse Comanche became a symbol tied to the Battle of the Little Bighorn in June 1876, one of the largest clashes between indigenous forces and United States troops, strengthening the legacy of the Old West. The 1874 expedition, led by General George A. Custer into the Black Hills, marked a turning point in escalating conflict between the United States government and indigenous nations, since treaty violations increased tensions and later helped lead to the Sioux Wars. Bloody Knife became a notable figure by serving as a scout for Lieutenant Colonel Custer during the 1873 Yellowstone expedition, an operation meant to protect American railroad engineers during territorial expansion and conflicts with indigenous nations, influencing United States advances into traditional native lands. The Alaska Gold Rush between 1898 and 1900 drew thousands of adventurers into the interior, determined to find fortune in harsh land, crossing huge distances of up to 1,400 miles, a surge that sped up the growth of northern towns. The transport strategy, using teams of 20 mules to carry borax from Death Valley to the railroad, became an icon of industrial development in the western United States around 1900, marking the importance of borax in economic expansion and in the harsh local conditions. The Alaska Gold Rush, which gained momentum from the 1890s onward, attracted thousands of adventurers and prospectors searching for fortune, encouraging the settlement of remote places like Nome, whose importance grew with the discovery of gold on its beaches in 1898. The crossing of mule trains in Skagway, Alaska, around 1897 reflects the migration movement of the Klondike Gold Rush, when thousands of people searched for fortune in the far north, driving economic development and settlement in the region. Employees of the Wells Fargo Express Company appear beside an armored wagon in South Dakota in 1890, a period marked by the expansion of the North American Old West and the growth of money transport networks that were essential to the region's economic development and trade. The historic stagecoach, the Deadwood Coach, recorded in 1889 by Carball, represents the peak of transportation in the American Old West, connecting isolated regions before railroad expansion, which was essential for economic development and the integration of United States territory. The legendary stagecoach known as the Deadwood Coach appears recorded in 1889, strengthening the symbolism of the Old West in the expansion into Dakota Territory, whose settlement was decisive in the gold rush and the development of the United States at the end of the 19th century. Concord stagecoaches were essential for carrying passengers and mail in the United States during westward expansion in the 1860s and 1870s, often protected by soldiers because of instability and conflict along frontier routes. The construction of the Laramie Hotel in Laramie City, Wyoming, around 1868, happened at the same time as the advance of the Union Pacific Railroad through the American West, a milestone of United States territorial expansion whose effects drastically changed the towns of the region. The arrival of settlers and workers in Summit County, Utah, in 1869 coincided with the completion of the first transcontinental railroad in the United States, a milestone that connected the east and west of the country, speeding up settlement, freight transport, and the region's economic expansion. Steve Hovey worked as a wagon boss during the Great Migrations across the North American West around 1874, a period marked by expansion into territories previously dominated by indigenous peoples, which drove agricultural development and settlement in the United States. In the period right after the United States Civil War, markers like this on the plains of Kansas guided travelers, railroad workers, and settlers moving westward, symbolizing the expansion and changes driven by railroad construction. Settlers tried to establish land rights in Oklahoma Territory around the 1890s, a period marked by land runs in the United States, when thousands of people moved in search of property and new opportunities after these areas were open to occupation. Women who worked in roles such as washerwomen played an important part during the gold rush, especially in Alaska and the Yukon Territory around 1902, a period when intense migration deeply changed the economy and everyday life of those areas. Volunteer groups like the fire department in Circle, Alaska, showed the crucial role of communities in fire protection during the settlement of the territory around 1900, a time before organized professional fire departments were established in the United States. Galena, South Dakota, stood out in the late 19th century as a mining community driven by the gold boom that attracted thousands of prospectors to the region. In 1890, this development changed the landscape, strengthening the role of the American West in the economic expansion of the United States. Dobbin's Mills in the Black Hills of South Dakota, recorded in 1890, symbolizes the economic expansion that followed the region's gold rush in the late 19th century, when local industries such as mills played a key role in the settlement of new communities. The Toll Gate Saloon in Black Hawk, Colorado, shown in 1897, reflects the peak of saloons during the gold rush in the American West, when places like this stood out in the daily life of mining towns, serving as gathering spots and essential leisure places for the local population. The gathering of 40 indigenous canoes at Daya around 1897 shows the impact of the Klondike Gold Rush, when native peoples in the Alaska region helped explorers and prospectors with transport and navigation, showing intense contact between different cultures. The Taos Pueblo Adobe Complex in New Mexico has existed for centuries and is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Between 1879 and 1894, indigenous communities still maintained traditional architecture while resisting settlement pressures and cultural assimilation. Press correspondents recorded a group crossing 275 miles from Omaha on October 24, 1866, showing the importance of the Union Pacific Railroad expansion, which drove development in the American West and transformed communication and migration in the 19th century. Union Pacific Railroad leadership met 250 miles west of Omaha in October 1866, an emblematic moment in United States railroad expansion that enabled economic integration of the territory and sped up the country's development toward the Pacific. Workers and engineers involved in expanding the United States rail network played a crucial role in the 1860s when the Transcontinental Railroad linked the East and West, driving economic development and speeding up settlement of the American interior. Andron Sylvester's Saloon in Georgetown, Colorado, recorded between 1892 and 1900, reflects the typical social atmosphere of the post-gold rush period in the American West, when places like this served as meeting spots for miners and local merchants. Fremont, Nebraska, emerged as a strategic settlement point right after the end of the American Civil War in 1865, a period marked by railroad expansion in the western United States, a factor that drove the founding of new towns and supported agricultural development in the region. The meat trade remained active in downtown Midland, Texas in the late 19th century, when Christmas of 1892 marked everyday life in a fast-growing community thanks to railroad expansion, bringing prosperity and new economic opportunities to the region. Amarillo, Texas, experienced the typical growth of the American Old West between 1887 and 1888, when towns rose quickly because of railroad expansion and cattle ranching, strengthening the region's economic and population growth in the post-Civil War period. The busy street in Arapahoe, Oklahoma Territory, around 1894, reflects the setting of westward expansion after the opening of the unassigned lands in 1889. A milestone that drove the rise of new settlements and businesses in the United States frontier region. Places like the Pendleton Hotel, the First National Bank, and the Marshall Blacksmith Shop show the development of towns in the North American Old West, a setting of major growth after the arrival of railroads and the gold rush in the 19th century, a milestone that drove regional urbanization. Flagstaff appears in Arizona Territory around 1899 as a thriving railroad center tied to westward expansion in the United States, when the arrival of the railroad drove town growth and made settlement in the region easier, marking an important stage of American colonization. Trade and social life filled the main street of Coleman, Texas, whose founding was driven by railroad expansion in the late 19th century. The growth of grocery stores and saloons in 1882 reflected the strengthening of small towns in the American West during that period. Grand Island emerged as one of the centers of westward movement in the United States when, in 1867, places like saloons and stores shaped everyday life for residents, reflecting the expansion of pioneer fronts encouraged by the arrival of the railroad in the region. The first water supply work in Perry, Oklahoma Territory, recorded on October 10, 1893, marks a phase of rapid urban growth driven by the land run, an event that made white settlement and town development in that region possible. Public meetings like the one held in Chebaleta, New Mexico, recorded by Charles Pierce, represent the democratic tradition of small rural communities in the American Southwest in the early 20th century, strengthening direct citizen participation in local decisions during that time. Chinese workers were essential to United States railroad expansion between 1865 and 1869, especially in places like Nevada, where camps such as Brown Station became critical points for building the Central Pacific Railroad, driving economic progress and territorial integration of the United States. Workers built track for the Prescott and Eastern Railroad in Arizona Territory around 1898, a crucial stage of United States railroad expansion that boosted economic integration and sped up development in the American West in that period. The Grand Hotel stands out in the center of Silverton, Colorado, photographed between 1890 and 1895, a period marked by intense silver mining that fueled the region's economic growth. Its construction reflects mine-driven prosperity and rapid Old West urban growth, cementing the town as a mining hub. Photographer William Henry Jackson's assistants joined expeditions across Colorado in the 1870s, a crucial period for mapping and visually documenting the American West, which helped support the creation of national parks and establish Jackson as a leading landscape photographer. Abilene, Kansas becoming a shipping point for Texas cattle around 1867, marked the expansion of rail transport in the United States, easing interstate trade and boosting economic development in the still pioneer-paced American West. The founding of the Major Pease Ranch on the banks of the Yellowstone River in Montana, recorded in 1872, matches the period of westward expansion in the United States, marked mainly by the search for new land and the development of farming and ranching in the Great Plains region. The streets of the North American Old West became centers of trade and social life between the late 19th century and the early 20th century, a period marked by town growth after the gold rush, making saloons, general stores, and drugstores vital places for local residents. Layman's Log Cabin, recognized as the first building of its kind in Yosemite Valley, California, around 1895, symbolizes the start of non-indigenous settlement in the region, an important step that came before the creation of Yosemite National Park in 1890 and helped drive local tourism. The Midland and McDonald store was a local source for guns, ammunition, and hardware in the late 19th century, a period marked by industrial expansion in North American towns, when stores like this played a central role in urban growth and the supply of essential goods. Art Pulliam appears in a typical late 19th century activity, when coyote hunting was common in Midwestern United States regions like Custer County, Nebraska, in 1889, reflecting rural expansion and human impact on local ecosystems during that period. Solomon Butcher recorded rural life in Nebraska between 1886 and 1891, a period marked by the advance of agricultural settlement in the American Midwest, helping document the challenges and adaptation of pioneers to the dry conditions of the Great Plains. Vaqueros brand calves in a traditional rodeo in 1888, a crucial moment for cattle ranching in the United States Old West, when cattle were marked to guarantee ownership and herd control across vast grazing lands newly settled through territorial expansion. The workshop of R. Tatch identified on its signs as a blacksmith and wheelwright shop, reflects everyday life in small Anglo-Saxon towns of the 19th century, a period marked by strong craft activity before motor vehicles became common. Coal Station was one of the key support points for stagecoaches and travelers during transportation expansion in the western United States around 1885, a period marked by the gold rush and the growth of California towns seeking economic opportunity. Groups of miners focused their efforts in El Dorado, California, driven by the discovery of gold, whose announcement in 1848 marked the start of the famous gold rush, an event that transformed the American economy and sped up settlement in the western United States. Farm workers engaged in harvesting symbolize agricultural expansion in California during the late 19th century, when properties like Irvine Ranch strengthened their economic importance, contributing in a major way to the development of mechanized farming in the United States. Families like the Homonts were central to the settlement of the American Great Plains after the Homestead Act was passed in 1862, encouraging farm settlement in harsh regions, and their mud houses, common in Nebraska around 1886, symbolize the resilience of pioneers. A member of the Cheyenne people, recorded in a photograph wearing traditional clothing and holding a hand axe, points to the period of contact between indigenous peoples and settlers in the United States, marking a scene of cultural and territorial resistance between the 19th and 20th centuries. At a cowboy camp along the Yellowstone River in Montana, practices like these marked the settlement period of the American West, when ranches and cattle work drove territorial occupation and shaped the image of cowboy life. Drilling and using artesian wells in Kern County, California around 1880 was a crucial step for local agriculture, enabling irrigation in dry areas and driving settlement of inland California, a key factor in regional growth. Donkeys hauling wood reflected daily life in Colorado towns in the late 19th century, a period marked by settlement growth driven by the gold rush. Reliance on these animals showed local technological limits before rail expansion. Multifunction local businesses, such as small stores that also served as a post office and general shop, were common in rural United States towns in the late 19th century, reflecting how essential services were centralized in daily life. These places supported communication as well as social and business contact, playing a crucial role in community development during American territorial expansion. Williams runs the English Kitchen, offering affordable meals for 20 cents in Round Pond, Oklahoma, likely reflecting changes driven by railroad expansion and early 20th century rural growth when small towns tried to attract workers and travelers. Customers and staff at the Yellow Aster Saloon, one of the best-known places in Randsburg, California, take center stage in a moment tied to the early 20th century gold rush era, when mining changed the region's character. A building called the Bijou served as a gathering place and entertainment venue in small late 19th century towns, reflecting the peak of leisure spaces and local theaters in the United States, important for social and cultural growth during westward expansion. Ranches like the one mentioned in Mendocino County symbolize agricultural expansion and European settlement in the western United States after the 1849 California gold rush, driving regional economic growth and deeply changing the landscape and local social relations. Built during the gold rush boom, the house at Slippery Ford in El Dorado County reflects a milestone of settler expansion in mid-19th century California, a period that drove the rise of mining villages and contributed to United States economic expansion. Ute people gathered by a tent made of moose hide symbolize indigenous life before the intensification of United States removal and territorial restriction policies between 1871 and 1874, a process that had lasting impacts on native cultures. A record of a group of Pa-Ute people in Nevada, dated 1871, highlights a period of intense contact between indigenous people and settlers in the United States, when removal and assimilation policies threatened traditional ways of life and left lasting consequences for these communities. The expansion of cattle ranching in Arizona around 1896 to 1897 drove regional economic development by tying beef production to growing railroad and urban networks, strengthening the role of the American West in the national food supply. The figure of the horse trainer in Bonham, Texas in 1910 symbolizes everyday life in the interior of the United States in the early 20th century, a period marked by the advance of the agricultural frontier, intense rural labor, and social change driven by animal domestication. The Salish delegation from the Flathead Reservation in Montana gathered in 1884 as a reflection of a time of intense negotiations and pressure faced by indigenous nations because of United States expansion, showing the challenges to their autonomy and cultural preservation. S. Rapinski appears connected to the Chilkat Post Office, a place that was important during the Alaska Gold Rush in the late 19th century, which attracted many expeditions searching for wealth and encouraged the rise of new trade routes and contact with local indigenous peoples. Farmer settlements in the Dakotas around 1888 reflect the advance of the settlement process in the American West, driven by the Homestead Act of 1862, which made land ownership easier and brought major social, economic, and cultural change to the region during that time.